I think Simon already had some fans, so I don't think in the panel here, at least starting from me, we're not as creative as Tokumbo, and I think actually very boring. We come from industries that are very boring, right, David? Not as creative as this one. So my name is Bernard Laurendo, managing partner at Laurendo and Associates, and I guess today what we'll be talking about is the impact in terms of economics, jobs of the creative economy. This is something that in this country is being, it's a sector that's being given, I wouldn't say quite a bit of focus, but slowly it's getting quite a bit of recognition. And so with me today we have Simon, Executive Chairman at the Sydney Film School, as well as David, Senior Advisor at the Ministry of Labour and Skills, Charles, Chief of Consumer Business, and so we'll try to spend, of Safaricom, yes. It was, for me, it was so obvious that I almost missed it. And so we'll spend about 40 minutes maybe in a conversation about some of these topics, but then I really want to hear also from the audience in terms of, and I recognize some of you out there, and so feel free to think about any questions that you may have for the panelists, and I'll turn to you at some point. So in Ethiopia, we usually like to start with the government because we tend to respect the government quite a bit. So why don't I start with David? And David, I know there's been a pretty interesting and actually comprehensive document that was written by the Jobs Creation Commission about 2 years ago, the plan for job creation. Can you tell us a little bit about that section, around the creative economy, and then the number of jobs that we're hoping to create here in Ethiopia, the dynamics that we're trying to create, etc.?
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, Bernard. And it's very good to see lots of young people here excited about this sector. And we were definitely excited I'll say 3 years ago now, when we started the Jobs Creation Commission. We wanted to make the creative industry to be one of those sectors, because we recognized at the time it was one of those sectors that was underserved. So in addition to Ethiopia's ambitious plan to create millions in the sectors that we know and recognize, which is agriculture in Ethiopia, we wanted to have a bit of a mix, especially those sectors that have a huge potential to uplift youth into that industry and then create jobs in the process. One of them among the three that we added was the creative industry, in addition to tourism and the ICT sector. And at the time, of course, there was very little understanding, I'm talking about 3 years ago, as recent as 3 years ago, of what potential the sector had in terms of supporting young people into jobs. And so we were lucky enough to be advised by leaders in the industry, such as, I have to give due credit here to Mehret Mandafro. She did an excellent job advising us what the potential was in the creative industry. When I say creative industry, it includes film, visual arts, fashion, and all that. And surprisingly, we realized that in 5 years, we can actually create 900,000 to 1 million jobs if we do everything right, as we've put it in the strategy. But of course, we also realized at the time there are structural barriers of why we don't have a burgeoning film industry in Ethiopia, say, compared to Nigeria. And these structural barriers, surprisingly, one of them was taxation. For creatives, which intellectual property is the main goal, the main vehicle for earning incomes, struggle with withholding taxes, which are as high as 30%. I don't know, maybe someone can give us a context in terms of global benchmarks in Australia, elsewhere, but very high. Also importing equipment, the basic equipment. I'm glad today we're talking about smartphones, because at least we are making it easier. But the kind of cameras that you see around in the audio-visual equipment in Ethiopia since the emperor's time was considered as a luxury. So it's taxed at a ridiculous amount, talking about 200, 300%, just to get a decent Canon camera into the country. And so just at that level, we realized there's a lot we need to do in terms of simplifying the process by working with other institutions. There were a few other problems, such as, the sector was not really organized. So we believe that it was calling for a commission, a film commission that can actually champion the cause. Very much fragmented at the time, and it still is. On top of that, we also realized there's a huge opportunity to start discussions on co-implementing treaties, right, with other countries, where Ethiopia can actually serve as a destination for filmmakers to come here, shoot their films, and in the process earn from that. I'm pretty sure Afar would serve a very good location for Star Trek or one of those sci-fi movies that keep coming out, or the comic movies that are coming out these days. So, we kind of put those priorities, those bottlenecks that are preventing the industry from growing. And we realize that while we do this macro level intervention, it's also important for the government to put creative industry as one of its top priorities for job creation. And that means a lot in Ethiopia, because that means public funds, right? Previously, young people like yourselves here gathered, when you want to create a job, traditionally it's expected that you go into agriculture or do micro industries, woodworking and cobblestones and things like that. But here we deliberately put it as one of the 11 priority sectors so that resources can be channeled to young people who want to go into that sector, whether as creators or people that are providing critical services for the industry, right? Catering and costume design and fashion and all that. And so with that in mind, we sanctioned it into the strategy, which will go to 2025. We have yet to do a lot in the sector, but I think that was a critical step in terms of making sure that it gets the necessary visibility and understanding in terms of creating additional incremental jobs to the country's job creation agenda.
Yeah, thanks for giving that perspective. And, I completely agree, David, right? When I remember almost 10 years ago, 15 years ago, for instance, even when you look at music videos on YouTube for Ethiopian music videos, they weren't as elaborate, as developed. But now, and okay, maybe I'm gonna age myself here, but more than 30 years ago, we used to also count the number of artists really, like literally on the fingers of our hands, right? But now fast forward a few decades later, and you cannot keep track of music videos anymore. The quality is as good as what you would see in Nigeria, if not Hollywood, to be very honest. And the number of artists is completely off the chart, no pun intended, but also the movies, right? And so maybe I'll turn to Simon then. I lived in California, and as we know, California is the sixth economy in the world. If you look at it, just the GDP, and a big share of that is Hollywood, Silicon Valley as well, but Hollywood takes a big share of that. Having said that, I also lived in Atlanta, and Atlanta, I remember in just a few years, it went from being a place where wasn't known for shooting movies, etc., to a place where Hollywood started almost relocating to Georgia. And so maybe if you can give us a perspective in terms of, because David gave us the pillars that have been set here in Ethiopia and from a policy perspective, but what can we do in Ethiopia in terms of attracting more? Morocco, for instance, I think is Indiana Jones, right? That was shot. Yeah. So, what can we do to attract also global actors on top of what David said in terms of harvesting the local talent?
Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to speak here. My background's interesting because I've actually lived in Abu Dhabi for 4 years. I set up film schools there. I worked in Hollywood. I live in Australia. I've worked in Australia. And I've set up film campuses all over the world. So I've been lucky enough to work with a number of different countries and film commissions. The question I think you had is, what can you do here? What's really interesting for me is I'm about to give the same advice that I just gave at another seminar in a place called Coffs Harbour in Australia. And if you know Russell Crowe, who was in Gladiator, Russell Crowe's about to build a film studio in Coffs Harbour, and their main industry is agriculture. And so they have to move into a creative economy as well. What are the things you can do? Well, what other places have done, like Georgia, is firstly the government's offered a rebate. So you're always at war. I know in Romania, if I shoot in Romania and the film is set in Romania, I get 45% cash rebate. I think Australia is at 30% for Australian content. So you look at those things. The second thing is, you've already said it, a film commission. Now, a film commission doesn't actually have to be too complex. It really can be one person and a telephone in a small office. But that one person is really important because everyone calls the film commission, which then directs you out to the people in the industry. So the two things I think you want to think about is, one, a service industry. Now, you mentioned Star Trek. They shot the last Star Trek movie in Dubai. I don't know if you know that. They built a 30,000 square foot studio. I was there a couple of weeks ago, and that's where they filmed the last Star Trek film. So in the service industry, which Australia has, and they do Thor, Matrix, Star Wars, people like you guys, you build your skills up so that you can actually service those films in craft department, art department, whatever it is. Now, the other industry is this, the creator industry. This is what I always advise. You're not one or the other, you're both. If you can be in the service industry and work as an assistant director, assistant camera, whatever that is, you will network and you'll build your skills up. Then you take those skills on Star Trek 9 or whatever they're shooting here, and you get a team of people that you meet on those films, and you start creating Ethiopian content. Now, the difference between Australia and Ethiopia on a numbers level, we have 26 million people in the country. You've got 120 million. You already have a market that is not being served as creators. The job for you guys is to get skilled in really making high production value, do that in service industry, and then start making films for your market here. I spent a lot of time in India. Tamil films do this. They make regional films. So I think they're the two things. I mean, I don't know if you want me to talk about, but you guys are all watching YouTube, correct? My kids don't watch television. They all watch YouTube. All their friends watch YouTube. YouTube, here are the statistics, ready? YouTube has 26 billion users a year across the planet. You have a distribution center through YouTube right now. You can make films about Ethiopia. You can get them on YouTube. For every, I think it's for, I've got the actual stats here, for every 1,000 views of your video, the ad revenue that comes back, I'll give you the exact one, is $3 to $5 per 1,000 views. You guys heard of PewDiePie? PewDiePie has 100 million subscribers on YouTube. You can actually use that and create a creator economy and actually make money from that as well. Why is that good? Then you can actually get your skills up to a point where you can start making television and feature films. So I think it's a really exciting time here. It's partly why I want to be coming back here. I'd like to do as much as I can to kind of help, because I saw what happened when I ran Abu Dhabi. I'm seeing what's happened in other places. You guys are just ready for it.
No, thanks, Simon. And to be fully frank, you know, when I listened to your accent, I don't know about you, David, but what comes to mind, and maybe for you it's an annoying joke, but it's Crocodile Dundee. And you know, back in the days here in Ethiopia, we had one channel. It started at 7 p.m. By 10 p.m. you had to go to bed. That's it, 3 hours of TV. Now there's like, I don't know, hundreds of channels. And so they used to, we used to watch the movie over and over again. So I think most of us here, maybe it is a young crowd, but we've seen Crocodile Dundee at least 4 times, 5 times. But thanks for that perspective from down under, as you...
Can I just offer on Crocodile Dundee? You talked about incentives. That film, they had a 10BA incentive in Australia, which meant any investors in that film got 120% tax deduction. The Australian film industry boomed through that sector. Then they took it away, and it really shrunk the sector. So if that's something you can consider.
Fantastic. So Charles, you know, we in Ethiopia usually when we try something new, whether it be the opening of the banking sector, telco, what have you, we always say, "Yalila agar tamakuro." It means, can we do a comp with a different country? And usually it's Kenya. So I'm very glad that you're here as a panelist because it's going to be very important also to get your perspective, especially from Safaricom, right? In terms of the infrastructure and how it can enable this whole economy. And usually, you know, at the Jobs Creation Commission, the idea is really to look at it from in terms of direct jobs, but then there's also a bunch of indirect jobs, right? And so can you give us a bit of perspective in terms of all throughout the value chain, especially for, you know, smartphone type of movie industry? How would you describe the infrastructure, number one, that's needed to enable that? But also, like, what are the jobs that are being created along this whole value chain?
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I think we are living in very interesting times. One, I think, why did Safaricom invest in Ethiopia? I think everyone, it's one of the youngest population, I think, in Africa. Around 75 million people who are below the age of 25. There are very few countries with such a demographic in the world where you have such a high concentration of young people. When you think about young consumers, the first thing that comes to mind is basically, I would say, data and internet. And it's a revolution when everyone has access to proper and good internet. And I think that's, for me, the transforming lives vision that Safaricom has. It's basically making sure that, one, there's a great 4G network across the whole country, which will take time to do. Second, is that smartphones are like a human right. Yeah, not an exception for now. Right now, the cost of smartphones is too much. It's treated like a luxury good. You cannot buy a decent smartphone with 5,000 birr. 5,000 birr is $100. That is a crime against humanity. Because in other typical markets, with $40, you can get an entry-level, decent 4G device. So here the incomes are, let's say, 75% of a typical sub-Saharan Africa market, but you're paying double the phone, which means we are really creating a huge barrier in terms of who can access the internet. Because even if network operators, Ethiotel, put up a 4G network, we do put up a 4G network. If the cost of phones is that high, we are creating a huge barrier. Yeah? And I think there are some discussions we're having with the government to say, Digital Ethiopia 2025 won't happen, with the way the cost phones are, priced. But now if you come to, from a consumer side, is there affinity for content? Very high. Yeah, because as I said, the country is very young. So when we talk to TikTok, I think everyone knows what is TikTok. I think there are 3.7 million users of TikTok in Ethiopia, but the difference is that on a monthly basis. But the difference is that their usage habit is like 1 hour, in a month is spent on TikTok. That's a very high consumption, given the cost of data and the barriers that are there on, internet. TikTok is free, but the data costs, which tells you already there's a market where people have money to spend on content. Yeah, that is so you say, is there affinity for content? Very high. That we see. Is there affinity for video content? Very high. YouTube has very high usage. TikTok has very high usage. There's a much higher affinity for video content than there is, let's say, for music content or for written out, content. The other thing I like doing when I go around any of the towns, I just tell the Bajaj guy, take me where you will go to watch football. In all these towns, there are many places where people go to watch, DSTV. Okay, obviously because they can't afford to have a DSTV, pay $100 in their homes, you go to this, video den. Yeah, the video den is as big as this room, but that thing surprises me. 200 to 500 people can sit to watch a game. How much do they pay? If it's a really serious game, like when Manchester was a good team, people will pay 15 to 20 birr. If it's a mediocre type of a game, you're talking about 5 to 10 birr. But you're talking about 500 people, 10 birr. So the willingness to pay for content is also there. I think that's where now these things need to come together. The population demographics work. We are coming to invest on the network. Because we are investing, Ethiotel is also improving their network, which means the connectivity is getting better. But we need to reduce the barrier of, let me say, the cost of phones, so that actually everyone can have a good, decent, 4G phone, whether you're a consumption or someone who wants to do content creation. And then the next thing is about what is the business model. Yeah, and I think for me that is where also as Safaricom we've learned a lot in Kenya. Because if I'm a content producer, actually in Kenya we run the biggest music business. But we run the business because people produce music, load it for ringback tones. You can think it's a ridiculous business. But you have 12 billion people using that service every day, paying $1. So which means on a monthly basis, there's $1 million to $2 million, paying out to content creators, for this. So if you think about Ethiopia, there are 60 million telco consumers. How many of them will be willing to pay 2 birr, 3 birr, 5 birr every day if there's great content? But the content has to be great, it has to be easily available, people will have to have, the devices. That for me will be the perspective that I'll offer.
No, perfect. Thanks for that, Charles. Maybe let me turn to David, and maybe this is also a question from Simon, because I think you gave us also some things to think about in terms of Digital Ethiopia 2025, but also you gave me some things to think about in terms of what is the unique value proposition of Ethiopia, because I mean there's the infrastructure, but also we like to describe ourselves as the 13 months of sunshine, right? But so maybe David first and Simon, but what would you say could be the unique value proposition of Ethiopia, saying, look, we have, for instance, different climates, different regions, different cultures. We have, if you go to the Afar region, maybe you can turn the next Indiana Jones, or shoot the next Indiana Jones there, or if you go to the castles in Gondar, you can shoot a movie that's related to, so we have a very diverse type of culture and peoples, etc. So I wanted to hear maybe the Ethiopian perspective, and David knows Ethiopia very well, all the different regions, but also from outside-in perspective. So maybe David first.
Thank you. I think this is a good question, right? So how do we position ourselves as a country to be the go-to place for the creative industry? For me, yes, Bernard, you began with the physical outlay of the country and the history and the culture and the richness, and that's very important. But I also want to start from the people right in front of us. This is a very young population. Of course, we keep saying that, but it's true. So that means there is talent. There is some hidden creative power hidden amongst our youth. And it only takes a little bit of training and exposure, right? And look, I mean, my colleague from Safaricom was saying, look, despite all the barriers and how expensive things are, people have a lot of hunger for being online, being connected, and having access to content. To me, we need to harness that power of the youth. We need to start structured programs for training. Yes, there is always the burden on government. Yes, we need to start a film school or a curriculum at Addis Ababa University. I don't think this is the time to really start thinking about short-term self-learning, online learning programs that anyone can start on your own, as well as people that are in the industry that could benefit from this. So I think the starting point for us is how do we work with the young people that are already present online, but how do we support them with the tools? How do we set up creative spaces so that they can come together and be coached throughout the process? It used to be very expensive to do that, right? Maybe back in the days you have to go to film school, somebody had to coach you through writing scripts and editing and all that. That technology was probably prohibitive in terms of getting people into the industry, right? It's a very tight network. Today it's a very democratized, liberal, open platform that we have, thanks to technology and thanks to Safaricoms and Ethio Telecoms. So I think we should begin with providing that kind of safe space, those creative spaces. And I've had a lot of conversations with Zaleman, who's the co-organizer for this event. And you know, we're really thinking about setting up such spaces, at least for Zaleman, for instance, to be the pioneer in that space. But the government already, and Bernard and myself, we work hard on the ecosystem building, we say, for the digitization process. And we spend a lot of time supporting incubators and accelerators, the Y Combinators of Ethiopia. And I think it's ripe now for investors to come in and create that space so we can harness that talent and convert it into something of value. So I think number one. But of course, as you say, this is also a country that has a rich history, culture, a very diverse culture. We're also lucky to be situated in where we are because we have 6, 7 agroecological kind of landscapes in Ethiopia, starting from one of the lowest places in the world up to the highest places in Africa. With the diversity of crops, birds, types, the rivers and the waterfronts. So it's an idyllic location for anyone that's choosing to shoot scenes here. But I think the emphasis should definitely be on the young people and what they can bring and how we can cultivate them to be in that industry.
No, I'm glad you bring that up because it's usually something that we forget in Ethiopia is the youth as an asset. And so really thanks for bringing it up. I think also the other thing to bring up is the fact that maybe 10 years ago we didn't have that much infrastructure, you know, to get from one point to another in Ethiopia. But now we have those roads, we have those streets, even, you know, within Addis Ababa, if you want to go in some small neighborhoods, you can access those. And I think maybe, you know, you made me think of something that, you remember what Haile Gebrselassie did about 20 years ago? There was also, yeah, the kind of putting the cart in front of the horse strategy. So what Haile Gebrselassie, and maybe you know him, is the 10,000, who doesn't know him actually? He basically opened a cinema without a movie industry. And so we could, I think, also think about those kinds of things. Maybe this is a call, you know, for potential investors to kind of put the cart in front of the horse in some of these cases. But yeah, I'm also curious to hear about your perspective, Simon.
Sure. On locations, actually the biggest challenge for locations is green screen. If you watch The Jungle Book, not one bit of that film was shot in a jungle. It was all green screen. So that's a big element because, and with you've got now the volume that they've used on The Mandalorian, you can create so much inside a studio, and why filmmakers like that is because they love control. They do it. Having said that though, we were talking earlier about Mad Max Fury Road. Now that was supposed to be shot in Broken Hill in the outback of Australia, but it was far too green. They had all this rain, so they packed up and they moved to Namibia and shot the whole film in Namibia. So there's those areas, but I think, look, you know, and talk about also online learning. You know, apps like Cinefly, for instance, are amazing because they teach you how to make films. And you can do that straight away, download it and away you go. The issue that I've had with training filmmakers all over the world is if I said to you, let's train a soccer team via online. It's really difficult. This is a team sport. You all have to work together and understand how that team works. Now in your content creation, 100%, you can do things, learn online, but if you're going to learn how to be a service industry as well for Star Treks or whatever, you need to understand how to work as a team because that's what filmmaking actually is. The final thing I guess I'll say is this, you have a blank slate. How amazing is that? You can do things where you don't have to fight culture that's already established of, well, we always do it that way. This is how we do it in Hollywood. You can go, well, we're not going to do that. And then you can embrace all of your IT and say, we might incorporate our AI. I'm not even going to pretend what you could do, but you have a blank slate and it's you guys that are going to figure this out. All the young filmmakers are going to come up with these ideas, and I'll say where it'll come from necessity. You want to do something that's big and grand and you'll figure out how to do it, and all of a sudden you guys might be breaking ground here that everyone else will adopt those techniques.
Oh, very good, very good. Yeah, this is always kind of the leapfrog effect, you know, when you start from a clean slate. And I do agree that also Ronaldo is not going to train on Zoom, right? If he wants to be the next big World Cup soccer player. So maybe again, turning back to Charles, you know, I'm pretty sure like any other industry, the creative industry, right? must have, because I'm not super familiar with the industry, but I'm pretty sure there are some, in a room of 100 people, let's say, you will have like the super creative. So these are the folks who would come up with the amazing ideas of how to take a shot, etc. But then there's also some very commodity, pardon the term I use, but kind of repetitive type of processes, and I think the reason why also today we're talking about smart movies is the fact that it's become democratized, right? So how do we also make sure that we decipher between those creatives and give them the infrastructure that they need versus the commodity type of processes and the infrastructure that they need? And I'm asking this, from a consumer business standpoint. You don't need a Mercedes if you're going to do some of these commodity type of things, right? So what is the Volkswagen that we need for these kinds of processes, and how do we enable them versus the Mercedes that we need, or the Rolls Royce, I don't know, that we need for the super creatives in the room in this industry?
For me, my perspective is always very interesting. I started my career early 2000s working for Eastman Kodak. We used to sell film. Yeah? There was no digital cameras. Yes. And part of the job for the marketing team then was to teach people how to take good pictures. Yeah, but when I think about now, if I gave a kid who is 5 years my phone, they will take better pictures than the photographers of 20 years ago. For me, I always believe technology changes how we work. Yeah, I think it changes how we work. If you ask anyone here who has a TikTok account, who taught you how to do the videos? Who taught you how to do the transitions? Did you go to school? Who taught you how to, inlay the music within the video? These things, 15 years ago, if someone did such a, content production, you'll have been, wow, this is a, 20 years of experience. They really know how to do transitions. But now when you watch 19-year-old kids, because also, there is technology provides basic building blocks that were not there before. Yeah, if you were to do this, 20 years ago, everything had to be manual. You had to know how to, cut, slice, slide in the music. Now it comes, out. Choice of music is there. Which transition do you want? What kind of, filter do you want? These things are already enabled. Yeah? So there's a lot of basic building blocks, technology based, whether it's AI or whatever it is, which is already available to people. So the basic and the younger, let me say, content creators get access to technology, the more amazing things they can do by the time they are 20 compared to people who had, been holding cameras for, 50 years. So that side is very well, I would say, enabled. What is still an issue is then, with all these skills, how do I make money? Yeah, I think that is usually the issue. The creative side is well enabled, but the question is then, how do I make money? And I think that's where now the issue of then, from a government perspective, what is the intellectual property framework? Yeah, if I create something, how do I make sure it's actually I can earn an income out of it? Yeah, and then now it's for the other industry players to say, as us as the telecoms, yeah, how can we create then a proposition that if consumers watch this content, as we are interested in, people are using data, but then how can we share the economic value that is created, back? So there's some work for the government to do around IP, because the creative industry is around, as you're saying, you're just selling your creativity. There's nothing, it's not a phone or anything, you're selling your creativity. So the IP side, we underplay the role of actually having a very clear IP framework in the country, and then creating the right business models. Yeah? Whether the right business model is a telco, content creator, or an aggregator, all those things need, let me say, legal frameworks. But if you ask me, the training that we need to do for content creators is not about how to shoot content. It's about how to protect your IP. What are the business models available for you to monetize your content? For me, I think that is, I would say, the challenge. I'll leave everyone in this room to say, how do you build that side? Because I think the creative side is already very well developed, and you cannot do more than the young people in terms of creativity, yeah? But you can help them around the business side, the business model, the IP side, and what are the options for me if I have this great content, how can I make money?
No, you brought up some good points, and actually I want to turn to David because I see Daniel in the room here from Guzotech, and because Charles mentioned something very important in terms of the business model, right? So you may have that very creative person in the room, and the folks working for that person, and yet sometimes it's very difficult to come up with a business model, especially in a country where the awareness for these kinds of services, these kinds of creative industries is not really recognized. And some folks like Guzotech, and we have also here, I don't know actually if he's in the room, but Kukulu, I don't know, David, if you've played with David Kukulu, but they struggle, I think, and maybe Daniel is going to be interesting to get your perspective later, but to have a standing business model. In some cases, it's a consulting type of engagement. In some cases, you need to, for instance, Kukulu is in the gaming industry, and what was really a struggle for them in the beginning was, the digital payment. So they weren't able to really collect the fees for those gamers, from those gamers. And so, David, how do you think, I think some of these things now are being facilitated, and we are going to have and see more digital payment solutions, but from a maybe raising awareness standpoint, and for these folks who are really trying really hard to localize some of this content, how do we raise the awareness? How do we make those policies enabling, the digital payment or other things like that to enable the business model, basically?
This is a very good question, How many of you are actually creators here? Or like how many of you have actually, just show of hands, like done a video and uploaded it onto some platform? Okay, a few hands. How many of you have a foreign bank account or a currency account? Okay. I mean, I think we're getting to the heart of the matter, right? If you are to monetize on your creativity. I think on the intellectual property side, there are some progresses made, right? The royalties, and I think now the court systems in Ethiopia are getting used to how to address issues relating to intellectual property. And I'm sure you've heard about cases among yourselves or your friends where there was a copyright case that went to court and someone, I think we're doing progressively well on that front. I think the missing piece is the monetization, right? How do you create an economy out of this and people make a living out of it? And one big barrier Bernard is trying to get at is how do you get paid online? Even our biggest ride-hailing app, Ride, you still have to pay cash when you get off. It's not like automatic payments are made into your account. But at least I think the key is we've recognized that. I think this year, I don't know how many of you have been following National Bank's efforts to allow digital payment platforms to process payments, including remittance. Some of them, like Hello Cash, I think had a unique product for processing when you do not have an account abroad. And so these, payment platforms, the digital payment platforms that are, one of them being ArifPay, which Bernard is involved with, are trying to innovate in that space so that payments can be handled digitally. And so then you don't have to fly to, I don't know, Mauritius or Australia to get paid for your work. So that's a critical thing we need to do. It is happening, there is some progress being made, but it's not enough. But I want to throw the ball back at you guys. You are the one holding the weapon or the tool. It's up to you to make the noise. Sometimes change comes also from bottom up. People with the, media used to be something that's restricted. I keep coming back to this point. But now you are fully empowered. You are connected. You have a device. You can inquire. You can put pressure on government to allow you to do such things. I think, there's a lot of social activism that I see in some fronts, but not enough to solve your own problems. It's something that is mind-boggling for me in Ethiopia. We've had discussions where we put room full of young people, creators, people in other industries, like, what do you want? And I don't always hear articulated demand, because you have to make a demand. My friend was saying this is a sin, in terms of not allowing people to have the full kind of benefits of the digital economy today. But I think it is also on you guys, as opposed to producing funny videos on TikTok or entertainment, obviously, which is important, but also be active, bring that positive energy for change, and play the role in terms of being that activist and saying, look, I'm doing well, I'm creating this product, I have this many followers, but look, I'm struggling to be paid. Government, pay attention. You need to help me sort this out. And so I think that level of activism needs to happen. I'm not saying the wrong kind of activism. I do not want to advocate for that. But for the things that can help you grow and become, fully empowered in this sector, I think it's important for you also to use the tools at hand to demand such things. That's not to say, of course, I'm representing the government here, that the government is not doing its best, but look, you are ahead of the government. Change usually comes from young people. So you are the ones always a step ahead. You are the ones agitating for change. And so there is an added responsibility of you asking the government and demanding such changes. And I think it should happen, and you have the tools. That's probably what I would say.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good segue actually to see if we can get one common voice or at least one voice from the audience. But before I do so, I do want to really emphasize the fact that, or the point that David made, because this is really important. When we started the Startup Act, remember, right, David? It was very difficult to have one single voice who represented the startup ecosystem. It's still a bit difficult, but now at least we have a startup association. And outsourcing, we just 2-3 days ago, excited to announce that there's an outsourcing association now, and there's, I think, a manufacturing association. I think we do, and there's also the youth entrepreneurs, the startup association. So we do need also a creative industry association, or whatever name is going to take, because otherwise, like David said, right, a lot of these things, and I'm glad you went there, because that's what I wanted to go, is in terms of raising awareness, don't expect the government to raise awareness for you. It's the opposite, right? It's the industry should say, hey, we're here, we want to shoot something here, we want to come up with this kind of job, and digital payments are not working, or you guys need to really accept e-receipts, and so on and so forth. And that's how the policymakers are really going to also learn, but also pay attention, and then also make decisions, right? So this is very important, especially in a country where I think most of us are very shy and don't like to speak up. David is the only one in 110 million people here. But so, any questions from the audience?
Do you mind if I just say one thing? On all of you who are creators, I know you want to make your dream project, but what you have to understand, this is a business. So get really good at making content. You have what's your gross domestic product? $111 billion a year here, right? So you've got companies here who will need help in making television ads, a whole range of things. Cinefly does user-generated content within the organization, but you might do a high-end ad for something. That's part of your skills. And understand, like Michael Bay started making video clips. So don't let go of your dreams of those big projects you want, but understand this is a business. And I truly mean this. If you're going to be dependent on the government from day one, you won't have an industry. You have to work with the government, who will provide certain resourcing and just support. But if you're going to create a creative industry, it has to be an industry. And you have to get it in your head that the skills you have making a television ad or a music clip for publishing companies or for corporations is not beneath you. It's very proud work, because that will extend your skills and your business knowledge. Then you can move on to bigger projects.
Thank you, Simon. So any feedback, comment, questions, or movie that you want to show right now? Okay, we have one here, and then one there, and then Andile as well. Yeah. Do we have mics?
Thank you. I wanted to ask my opinion and my perspective when it comes to the governmental policy. I believe it should be really fast when it comes to this kind of decisions because, you know, we're running against time. Technology is going really fast. Like we've been talking, like the Mandalorian, they don't need to go out of their studio to shoot. So if we don't hurry up on this kind of projects and invest really fast and have like strong decisions to help the creative, there won't be any shoots to do in Afar because they can do it at their studio because technology is going at a faster rate than we can catch up. So the government should create more stronger policies with less time to help the creatives, and that's my opinion. And what are you willing to do with those kind of situations?
So maybe we'll do a round of question, and then you guys can reflect on all of them. I think there's another one there.
Thank you very much. I'm Damana. I would say to thank you very much for the Lehman Film production. First of all, I'm one of the trainer. My question for Mr. David, at the government side, what they help for the younger filmmakers, and what the budget for training in future for new youngers for training center. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. By the way, don't get surprised if you get 0 questions, both of you. Usually, when it's like this, the government gets all the questions and gets hammered. So,
So I have a question for the gentleman from Safaricom. I interviewed a C-suite executive at a major African telco, or actually multinational telco, some years ago, and I asked him a provocative question, which is, if you could imagine the mobile telco consortia across the continent being disrupted by a single technology or trend, what would it be? And he told me content, right? So I wonder strategically how Safaricom thinks about being in the content game, enabling it, or potentially being disrupted by it.
okay, fantastic. That was a very journalistic question, Dandile. And then I think Thomas had a question, or not really? So, okay.
Okay, thank you. Here in Ethiopia, there are many young peoples who want to join the creative industry. Some of them have a great idea, but didn't start to create creative contents, and some of them start to create contents arbitrarily. So, is there any opportunity for them to train or educate themselves to improve their skills and knowledge? If you have any plan, or if you know there anything, please explain something. I don't know who can answer this, but I raise this question for all of them in the stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for all the questions. So we've had things around improving skills. Is there any place where I can get, or a center for that, training center, content for Charles? So maybe we start with Charles around content and Safaricom.
Yeah, I think this is always an interesting one for us. If you look at what's happening in the telco industry now across all over the world, voice was basically the building block or the foundation for all, I would say, mobile telcos. But more and more, it's moving to data, the internet. Basically, people are willing to pay more for data than they are willing to pay for voice. And when you think about what is the pillars or the foundation in terms of a good data business, one, you need a good network. Devices need to be affordable. You need to have a demographic of young, consumers. But then the last thing is usually content. What do I do when I'm on the internet? Remember, people are not interested in the internet itself. They want YouTube, they want TikTok, they want WhatsApp. It is the services on top which actually really matter a lot. So there's a very strong, I would say, symbiotic relationship between, if you want a great data business, you must find a way, to enable, provide a bridge between what consumers want to consume as content and what is available, or what is, if my lifestyle is that I'm interested in, let me say, football, Yeah? If your consumers are interested in football, you must find a way to enable them to watch football content. So in terms of when you think about now, how do you enable that? Many players have the whole range. You have AT&T, which bought, I think, Time Warner. Yeah, so they actually went into the content production side. But most telcos, what they do is basically partner to distribute. Yeah, because we don't know anything about content production. Once you enter that business, you're entering a space that is not your forte. Your forte is basically put to a network and get consumers. So, but you have very many telcos all over the world who are exploring various business model. AT&T well into the full, I buy a content house, I package it, I sell it to the consumers. Most of the other telcos are more into the in-between. Content is available, the content producers are looking for a way to access consumers, what can do in between to help with the distribution. So I think in Kenya we've stayed more in this, let me say, helping on the content distribution side than actually going into the content production. Historically, we tried that, then we realized it's not our forte. You just enter into a place where you have zero competence or zero value addition. So we are thinking more about the space of how do you help, create an enabling framework for distributing content, which is basically, connecting what your consumers want, yeah, and what the, how do you enable the content creators access the consumers.
So, policy-related questions. Look, government is going to be slow. That's just how governments work. That's how they work in Australia, that's how they work in the US, that's how they work in Abu Dhabi, that's how they work in Ethiopia. But I think let's talk about the creative industry, you guys that represent it today. That's why you're called creatives. You need to problem solve, you need to get around problems. And really, do not expect the government to be the one thinking about your problems 24/7. This is a country that is still trying to feed itself. There are priorities, and I'm not saying this sector is not, and we're trying our best, at least from a job creation point of view, to make this sector a priority. I'm not saying that, but I think there needs to be some expectation management in terms of government, how it operates and how it solves the problems. But one thing I agree is once we recognize that this is an important sector, yes, we need to provide training centers, we need to provide the necessary funding. And my friend, you asked about the budget and things. I represent the job sector. There is a whole ministry dedicated to promoting culture, and I wouldn't dare speak on their behalf, and I don't know how they aim to promote it but I can speak confident from a job creation point of view, which we sit at the cross intersection, right? And what we try to do as much as possible is, first of all, make sure that it gets the visibility that it needs. Make sure that public officials understand that this economy can also be a force for good. I think that's the number one thing that we need to do as a job. And then coordinate across ministries, get a new law into place. And there's one such law that will help you eventually, where Bernard and I were working very hard to get what you call the Startup Proclamation Act up and running, which should provide you the incentives that you need as a startup, regardless of which sector you are, especially because you're using technology, to not be kind of burdened with the ease of doing business issues that a lot of businesses struggle. So if that comes into effect, hopefully that will address some of your problems. But when it comes to specialized training, such as the one you're requesting for, I think that's where you're getting at, the private sector is better suited to do it, to be honest with you. And the best way for the government is to provide the necessary incentives and partnerships for the private sector to come and do it. Get yourself into a community of creators. Get the space, share projects across each other. Some of you might be good script writers, some of you could be audiovisualists, some of you are good with the technology and some of the skills that are required. Get together, get a community going, and then hopefully using those kind of collectives, the government can actually provide specific policy incentives. But to me, I'll be very realistic to you. The government is not going to tomorrow start opening training centers for creators. That's not going to happen. There is a lot that needs to be done in terms of democratizing and liberalizing education as we speak, basic education, including literacy, digital literacy. Those things will come first. But because this is your problem, I think it's very important that you start to think along the lines of forming a community of creatives. And of course, I know businesses like Zaleman, including this forum they have organized, which I think is phenomenal, especially just one individual taking the role of a government. This is something that usually needs to be done at a higher level, at a regional, like a governmental level or a corporation level. But Zaleman, for instance, is partnering with some institutions to do it. This is exactly what we want in Ethiopia. And hopefully the government can support that private sector player, kind of make the process be easier and make it hopefully financially rewarding in the process. But I think that's what I say. It would be completely unrealistic for me to say the government is going to start opening X number of training centers for you tomorrow. It's just not going to happen realistically.
All right, thank you so much, David. Maybe any closing words from Simon before we round this up?
When you talk about monetizing your content, whoever owns distribution owns the world. And right now, YouTube is the biggest distributor on the planet. That's one place. But you have to understand where your content is going to be positioned, I think, even before you make your content, so that you understand there's a doorway. The other thing is this. I'm going to speak generally for filmmakers. Filmmakers tend to find every reason not to make a film. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I've got to work a full-time job. I've heard every excuse under the sun, and I use them too. We don't want to sit down and write screenplays. We're nervous when we make films. We're afraid they're going to be terrible. But the thing is this. If you are going to wait for somebody to give you an opportunity to make your project, it probably will not get made. What you need to be is what I call a furnace. You have to have this burning desire in you that you are going to be so infectious to the other creatives around you that nothing will stop you making this project. The government incentives will be awesome, but they will have a certain parameter because, as you said, you're looking after the country. You're not a film studio. But if you can be that person, and maybe I'm talking to one person in this room, and you are going to generate so much energy and you're going to stay with a project that you're going to see it to its best possible capabilities. And by the way, I think it was Steven Spielberg who said, if you get 75% of what was in your head up on the screen, you've done an amazing job. We all compromise. You never get exactly what you want. George Lucas proves that because he keeps remaking Star Wars with new effects. If you're that person who can generate that kind of energy, I can guarantee one thing, if you do it and you deliver and it is of high quality, you'll have a relationship with the government, you'll have a relationship with studios, YouTube. They'll want to seek you out because you're that kind of person. But if you're going to wait for somebody else to give you the opportunity, you're probably going to be waiting a long time.
All right, thank you. So a big thank you to all our panelists and a big round of applause, please.